Dear viewers, welcome to this episode of People Who Matter. This is a segment where we get a chance to speak to the heads of the institution to know their viewpoints on the economy. In this episode, I am going to talk to a very popular CEO, dynamic, successful, and young and energetic Miss Radhika Gupta, the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Edelweiss Mutual Fund. Let's listen to her views on the Indian economy in this episode. This is NRI Money Clinic for you, and I am Dr. Chandra Khan, but your financial guide for a happy living.
NRI Money Clinic. No hype, just the right advice.
In this episode of People Who Matter, our guest of honor today is Miss Radhika Gupta, the celebrity CEO of Edelweiss Asset Management Company. She is very inspiring, very dynamic. She inspires everyone whom she comes in contact with. She is the daughter of an Indian diplomat. She was born in Pakistan. She never had a normal childhood like all of us had. She had to move from country to country every 2 to 3 years when her father got transferred. As a result, she has lived in many countries, including countries like Pakistan, many countries of Africa, many countries in European Union and USA as well. She had her education from University of Pennsylvania as well as prestigious Wharton School. She has come out of these institutions with the highest grade. Today she heads Edelweiss Asset Management Company as its Managing Director and CEO. She took over as CEO of Edelweiss Mutual Fund at her young age of 34 years. She built this institution brick by brick and brought it to its present glory. She is also a judge on Shark Tank India program as well. She has several awards to her credit, and the list goes on. Some of the important awards are: she is CII Young Women Leader of the Year, CEO of the Year, Sabre Awards South Asia Diamond, August 2023, Business Today Most Powerful Women India Business, March 2023, Jerome Fisher MNT Distinguished Alumni Award, University of Pennsylvania, March 2023, Forbes Women Power Self-Made Women, December 2022, Scotch CEO of the Year, December 2022, Young Global Leader, World Economic Forum, April 2022, Business Today Most Powerful Women in India Business, December 2021, and the list goes on and on and on. It's a great honor and immense pleasure to talk to this CEO, Miss Radhika Gupta. Let's look into what message she has for all of us. Welcome to this episode, Radhika Gupta ji. It has been waiting for a long time. I myself, as well as my audience, is looking to talk to you. Shall we get started?
Yes, we should. And I should thank you for the lovely introduction. And it's wonderful to talk to you, Chandrakanji, and all your NRI audience. I don't know if people know that I've been an NRI for some part of my life, so I have a special affinity for this group.
Thank you very much, Radhika ji. My first question is, NRIs always ask this question: should we really invest in India? What is that so compelling that you say that? I've heard you in many forums telling that one must invest in India. What is your argument in favor of this?
I think in the initial days of being an NRI, the argument was a lot more emotional about investing in India. But today, the reality of the fact is the entire world is looking at India. So as an NRI, to not look at your home country is not an option anymore. Because if you look at the Indian economy, I think it is a shining star among global economies. It's poised to be one of the fastest growing economies, even if we grow at 6.5%, 7% odd. And while the Indian economy has always doubled every 6 odd years, now you're seeing that happen at scale. And I think that is the exciting opportunity. So over the next decade, I think, and actually maybe 2 decades, India presents a very, very exciting opportunity. And there are 3 parts to it, if I had to summarize quickly. One is the fact that 70% of India's population today is young. So we really have demographics on our side. Second is, as many of you would have experienced, Indians have the magic of entrepreneurship. And I really think that the private sector in India, the animal instincts of the private sector have kicked in. Whether it is from the smallest startup that appears on Shark Tank to India's biggest listed companies. And the third is, from a time when perhaps we used to make self goals, I think policy and infrastructure is supporting your demographics and entrepreneurship. Now, it could be digital infrastructure, it could be physical infrastructure that is getting built, it could be policies like PLI, but these three things are coming together very nicely. And I think that marks the opportunity over the next 20 odd years.
Thank you, Radhika ji. We always hear that India is going to be the third largest world economy in the foreseeable future. That brings us to contrast the countries like USA and China, which are ahead of us. From a historical perspective, if you have to trace India's growth today in comparison to where USA was or where China was, how do you see that? Where are we now in the journey of USA or in a China from a historical perspective?
It's a great question. I think we are where the US was in the late 80s. And incidentally, if you remember, the 90s were a golden decade for the US. And many metrics stack up, whether you look at economic size, whether you look at household level of leverage, whether you look at financial participation by Indians in financial instruments. We are effectively the story of the US economy in the late 80s and early 90s. And the 90s were, as I said, a very, very special decade for the US. As far as China, I think our model of growth is slightly different from China. So I would say our model of growth is more similar to the US. Very, very domestic centered, open economy, open set of policy, democracy fundamentally. I think one commonality with China, and I want to illustrate it with a slightly funny example, is we have the benefit of young population that China did maybe 15 years ago. So if you remember, in 2008, Apple opened its first store in China. Their per capita GDP was about $2,700. And in the 15 years that followed that, China's economy expanded about 4 times. It's interesting, the same Apple has decided to open its first store in India about now, when our per capita GDP is about $2,700. So on the fact that demographics broadly aligned to China about 15 years. And there are other similarities. Credit expansion happened in China in that period. You're seeing credit growth pick up in India. You're seeing a manufacturing boom that happened in China, benefit of low labor cost many, many years ago. That is starting to kick in India. So some of these things are also similar, but this just places you in context.
Radhika ji, we hear a lot of news and noise about the defense industry. It used to be a problem for India, and the present government is working on it to change it completely. What is your perspectives about this defense industry? What has been its past, present, and the future scope of defense industry? How it changes the Indian economy?
I think it's very interesting, and I have heard about defense growing up as a child because my father was in the diplomatic services. So it was a conversation. And, 5-7 years ago, he started talking to me well before the market started talking about defense. He, as an individual, started talking a lot about defense. And he said, at that point, India used to be one of the larger importers of defense equipment. So we would be buying a Rafale from France, all of that. And he said, fundamentally, this is not sustainable because, as you said, if you want to be the world's third largest economy, you can't get away by being a huge importer of defense. And the reality is India is in a challenging neighborhood. So its defense needs are not going to go down. In fact, defense spending as a percentage of GDP, I suspect for India will grow up, and it's significantly less than US, China. So your defense spending has to grow up. And are you going to be able to get by importing it? No. And a few years ago, the government started this push towards what we call indigenization, making in India, etc., etc. And today it's interesting, 70% of the defense budget is allocated towards indigenous purchases. We have already done about $2.5 billion of defense exports. I think that number is targeted to go to 5 to 6 billion in the next few years. And as an Indian, I look at it in amazement that a country that used to import Rafales is now producing a fighter jet, and our defense equipment actually goes to 80 countries around the world. So we're still a small part of the global defense market, but I think we're able to cover some of our needs and build an export story.
Radhika ji, you mentioned about India is all about a demographic story, but there are some disturbing things that are happening in India at the moment. I can see that there is a clear divide between North and South. I heard that the entire South India replacement rate has dropped down to the region of about 1.67. And today in the southern India, we say the labor movement coming from the north, east, and to a certain extent from the west to support the labor markets here. Does this falling replacement rate of South India, does it disturb you? Can it have a potential to spoil this developing India story?
No, I think one thing you have to see is that you can't see India as an average. And, in the many states that we have, actually, whether in terms of population size or diversity, there are very different and distinct stories between states. So perhaps to your point, if you may not have the demographic advantages in the south, but the southern economies have actually been very strong for many years. But you take an economy like Gujarat has been a very strong economy also. Is another example. Now you'll take the home state I come from, which is UP. I think till 10 years ago, UP used to detract from the national average. Today, UP's economy aims to be a $1 trillion. It's got the advantage of demographics. It's now getting the advantage of governance and policy. And I think UP government has done a phenomenal job. But UP aims to be a $1 trillion economy. Karnataka, I think, will become a $1 trillion economy. So I think each state in India tells a very distinct story. You really can't look at India, as an average, and different states are at very different points in their journey.
Radhika ji, thank you for allaying those fears about the South India falling in its replacement rate. And still, we have to see India as a whole, and within India there are smaller pockets which will compensate for it, and the story is very much intact. You also mentioned that the India's per capita GDP is somewhere in the region of $2,700 per capita. Now you are in the knowledge of so much of a data and what's happening around. Where do you see this per capita GDP is likely to rise in next 10-15 years? What is its effect on final consumption and how the economy shapes up? Can you briefly tell for the benefit of my viewers?
So I think in the next 7 to 10 years, you should see per capita GDP double from 2,700 to 5,000 plus. As I said, this is a trajectory China went through. I will make 2 points here. One is that per capita, it is not only about doubling of per capita GDP. It's this crucial point of 2,700 because your basic needs, what we say in Hindi is roti, kapda, makan, are fulfilled in most countries at $2,700 per capita. And beyond that, any incremental dollar or rupee goes into either investment or consumption. And that is why you see the multiplier impact of the economy. So the point is very interesting. The second is, the same point I made about states also applies to India as a whole. You can't see us as a country of 1.4 billion people and everybody has a $2,700 per capita GDP. I'll tell you an alternative way to see this story. The alternative way is to cut India into maybe 3 or 4 countries. So the top 10% of the country, which is about 140 million people, accounts for half of India's economy. Now they have a per capita GDP of $12,000. That's a proper upper middle income country, and that will double in the next 6-7 years. Which is why you see the consumption boom in India. I mean, many people, NRIs also who come to India, are surprised to see hotel rates at $500 a night, which is comparable with many Western counterparts. So you have 14 crore people who are actually a reasonably rich country. And if you take the top 1% of that, which is still 1.4 crore people, which is still a lot of people, they are very rich. So that's one part. The second part is what I call the next rung of India, which is the next 10%. That's about 300 billion in size. And then finally, you have a large mass of 80% of India. So you can't see the Indian economy as just $2,500 per capita GDP.
Right. Thank you very much, Radhika ji. I think the answers what you gives a lot of confidence for the NRI community to decide that this is the time that they need to invest in India. We are at a cusp of time wherein which it is likely to take off, and I'm very sure they'll find courage to put more and more into the Indian economy and reap benefits out of this phenomenal growth. I have designed one rapid fire round for you. If you permit me, I will be taking up this. You can tell answers based on your instinct. I'll not hold you responsible. Future is always uncertain. We accept this is dedicated only for the CEOs. My first question to you is, should anybody invest now or after the budget of the new government, or invest systematically?
Invest systematically.
5 years from now, in Indian national rupee versus dollar equation will be below 90, above 90, or it is futile to guess?
Probably above 90, but futile to guess, but likely to depreciate.
When somebody is doing equity investment, invest 100% of your money, don't invest at all, or maintain exposure control.
Maintain asset allocation and control depending on your needs and personality.
By the year 2030, Indian economy size will be below 7 trillion USD or above 7 trillion USD.
My guess is above 7 trillion.
If you were to be an investor, which one will you choose out of these two? Multi-asset fund or a pure equity fund?
It depends on the kind of investor I am. I really think there's no right answer. My bias tends to be a little bit more equity, but for conservative investors, I think balanced funds are great. So
by 2030, inflation in India will be below 5%, above 5%, or too difficult to guess?
Difficult to guess. In the 4 to 6% range, I would hope.
By 2030, long-term FD rates in India will be below 4%, above 4%, can't guess at all.
Can't guess, but if I had to venture to guess, closer, higher than 4%, if any. I mean, rates usually move between 4 and 7, 8%.
If you were to be an investor, you will be a do-it-yourself investor or have an advisor to assist you?
I have an advisor.
If you were to be an investor, would you take investment decision independently or consult with your spouse?
Certainly with my spouse.
Thank you very much, Radhika ji. Thank you very much. And it has been a great pleasure talking to you on this episode. I'm very sure my community of viewers will get cues from this video and will invest more and more in India. Thank you very much for this episode. And we remain in gratitude to you for your kindness to give us the time and talk to my audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Dear viewers, hope you enjoyed this conversation with Radhika Gupta. If you enjoyed, do not forget to give me a thumbs up. If you are a person who is watching my episode for the first time, or if you are not yet subscribed for this channel, please hit that subscribe button now and press the bell icon. Do not forget to share these videos with your friends and relatives and near and dear ones and on all the WhatsApp groups on which you are connected with. Thank you very much for watching this episode on NRI Money Clinic. I shall be back with you with yet another episode next Tuesday. Till then, stay safe. Jai Hind.
Press the bell icon for more details and subscribe our channel.